This is coming out this book, The Unknown Catacombs, a unique discovery of early Christian art by Antonio Ferrer. We just went over the story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, in this book, as you can see, it says, the three Hebrews in the fiery furnace. Look at these three Hebrews. Look at the afros, and look at the dark complexion. The Israelites are black. Look at the facial expression. Look at the hair. Look at the hands. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're in a fiery furnace. See that? Greatest people on earth. This is page 124. This is the sacrifice of Isaac. You can see right here the sacrifice of Isaac. This is in the catacombs. That's why the wall's all torn up. Look at the afro on Abraham. That's Abraham. Look at the sword. It's been distorted. The whole wall has been distorted. Look down below. This is Samson. Black man. Samson slaying the lion. See that? This is on page 119. This is Christ between Peter and St. Paul. Look at how they purposely cut off the HAMASHAYACH. See that right there? That's angled that way to be taken. But you could tell that Christ was a black man. Look at the dark hands, look at the dark face, the dark hair. St. Peter. Now Paul is supposed to be on the other side of HAMASHAYACH. Look at this one. This is Jacob bringing the children of Israel into Egypt. This is in the catacombs in Italy. Look at that. The 12 sons of Jacob. All black young men. All dark complexion young men. Those are the 12 tribes. Those are the 12 sons of Jacob. Going into Egypt. This one says Joseph talking with his brothers in Egypt. Look at that. Dark men. Negro men. Not Caucasian. You gotta understand that this man lies about everything. These are on the walls in Italy, in the catacombs. So our forefathers put this on the walls. This is on the next page. Isaac's Mill. Just so y'all know, the Israelites were black. We are the greatest people on the earth. Everybody hates us. We are the greatest people on the earth, the Israelites. All right? We are the people that have lost our heritage. Judah, Benjamin, Levi, Simeon, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, Naphtali, Asher, and Issachar. We are the greatest people on the earth. I'm Shemaiah. As you can see here, this is the children of Israel fleeing from Egypt. Here are the Egyptians over here. This is Ham. You notice the color? It's kind of a little distorted, but they're all black. And across the river are the Israelites. Look at the Israelites. Those are all black people. Israelites leaving Egypt. Notice what it says here. The crossing of the Red Sea, figure 66 on the earth. But today we're going to talk about Joseph. Joseph. Out of Joseph came Ephraim and Manasseh. There's a picture in here I want to show you about Ephraim and Manasseh being blessed by Jacob. Okay, we're going to go to page 78, since we spoke about Joseph. Well, when he was in Egypt, his sons got blessed by his father, Jacob. And there's Ephraim and Manasseh getting blessed by Jacob. Notice that the arms are switched. The left arm is underneath the right arm, and the right arm is on Ephraim. The right hand's on Ephraim, and the left hand's on Manasseh. Those are the blessings that we read about in Genesis chapter 48. It says the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim became a numerous people. See that? So let's talk about Ephraim and Manasseh. So in Genesis chapter 48, verse 18, it reads, And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations, because Joseph was blessed, and so Ephraim became a multitude of nations behind Joseph. And he blessed him that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, YAHAWAH make thee as Ephraim, and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Now let's go to Genesis 49 and verse 22. Okay, so let's go into the story of Joseph, which is Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall. Now, in the land of Puerto Rico, they call it Port of Riches. And when the conquistadors came, they built the wall, and the Puerto Ricans call that wall El Muro. And that wall is the wall that the conquistadors in Ephraim would meet, and the enemy would sleep with our women. And so a lot of babies were being birthed in Puerto Rico, but the male childs were being killed by the women. It reads in verse 23, The archers have surely grieved him, and shot at him, and hated him. So who are the archers? The archers are the conquistadors. They grieved Ephraim and Manasseh. They shot at Ephraim and Manasseh, and they hated Ephraim and Manasseh, the so-called Puerto Ricans and the so-called Cubans. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty power of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, even by YAHAWAH of the Father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with the blessings of heaven above. Because if you go to Puerto Rico, they have the blessings of the skies, clear skies. They have rain that comes in to water the land. And the blessings of the deep that lieth under. When you look at the oceans and the seas, they have numerous fish, abundance of fish, and different types of seafood underneath the sea. It says blessings of the breast and of the womb. So Ephraim received the blessings of multiplying. And so this is why our women had children of the enemies. The blessing of thy father had prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors, unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. So when you go into Deuteronomy 33 and 13, let's go there real quick. Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 13. It reads, And of Joseph, he said, Blessed of YAHAWAH be his land, for the precious things of heaven, for the dew, and for the deep that covereth beneath, and for the precious fruits. When you look at Puerto Rico, they got mangoes, they got sugar cane, they got papayas. They have abundance of fruit all over those islands. And it reads, And for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon. At night, they have rare nocturnal animals like the lizard and the frog, with beautiful sounds that you can only hear in Puerto Rico. And for the chief things of ancient mountains, and for the precious things in the lasting hill. And what are the chief things of the ancient mountains and the precious things of the lasting hills? That's gold. They had gold, they had pearls, they had diamonds. Verse 16, and for the precious things of the earth and fullness thereof, and for the goodwill of him that dwelt in the bush. Who is that dwelt in the bush? That was the Most High, Yahawah. So Yahawah blessed Ephraim with those beautiful things of the land. Let the blessings come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren. So Manasseh and Ephraim were on those two islands of Hispaniola. His glory is like the firstlings of his bullocks, and his horns are like the horns of a unicorn. So this is talking about a rhinoceros, not a mystical creature called a unicorn. A rhinoceros has two horns. It has a large horn, and then it has a smaller horn, which represents Ephraim and Manasseh. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth. And this is how they got pushed to the western hemisphere of the earth. So Moses was prophesying that the 12 tribes would end up on the western hemisphere of the earth. And they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. Let's go to Hosea 11:10. And it reads, they shall walk after the Most High. He shall roar like a lion. When he shall roar, then the children shall tremble from the west. So Ephraim and Manasseh and the 10 tribes were pushed to the west. The Most High used Ephraim to push the rest of the tribes to the west. And we read about that in 2 Ezra chapter 13, verse 40 on down, where it talks about the 10 tribes coming over to the Americas after the Assyrian captivity. Verse 11, they shall tremble as a bird out of Egypt. So this is letting you know that Moses prophesied that they would go to the west, and Hosea is substantiating that they did come to the west. Let's drop down to Hosea chapter 12 and 8. Hosea 12 and 8. And Ephraim said, yet I am become rich. I have found me out substance. In all my labors they shall find none iniquity in me that were sin. So in Puerto Rico, Ephraim had become rich. He didn't know he was rich until the conquistadors came and saw the gold and the pearls and all those things. That's when Ephraim realized that he had something that the rest of the world wanted. So why did the conquistadors, Christopher Columbus, come to Hispaniola? It was prophesied that it would happen, but then it was because the 10 tribes started worshiping idols. Let's go to Hosea chapter 8 and verse 11. It reads, because Ephraim hath made many altars to sin, altars shall be unto him to sin. See that? So this is where you saw the temples and the pyramids and things like that. Ephraim started to sin by worshiping other gods, idol worship. It says, I have written to him the great things of my law, but they were counted as a strange thing. The so-called Puerto Ricans today don't even know that they're in the Bible, that they're one of the greatest people in the Bible, because their forefathers have sinned so terribly. They have been raped and robbed of their heritage. They don't know who they are. They're calling themselves Puerto Ricans, and they think that their inheritance is being Latin and speaking Spanish. We're going to read about that. Let's go to Hosea 4 and 17. Hosea 4 and 17. It reads, Ephraim is joined to idols. Let him alone. So the Most High telling you, leave Ephraim alone because he's joined to idols like Blue Maria, Santa Maria. They follow all these false images, all these idols. They sing voodoo songs. The Most High is destroying them because of their sin. This is why Cuba is hurting today. The so-called Cubans are from the tribe of Manasseh. They don't realize they're hurting because of their idol worship. Okay? So this is all prophesied in the Bible and also prophesied in history. This is from the famous book, Lost Tribes and Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders. It was copyrighted in 1978 by Ronald Sanders. Now he's going to report about something that happened in the 16th century. It reads, "The two men were soon back in the rugged mountains in which Francisco had made his initial revelation, marching relentlessly for a week before they finally came to a halt. It was a Saturday. Montesinos makes a point of telling us, and they had come to a river larger than the Douro. Are there echoes of the Sabbatean in all of this?" Sabbatean is in the land of Israel. "Here, Francisco announced, is where is your brothers will be seen." Waving a banner high in the air, the Indian guide soon was greeted by a puff of smoke far beyond the other bank of the river. In response to a signal, the two men waited. Eventually, a canoe appeared bearing 3 men and a woman, all of them Indians, to the place where Francisco and Montesinos were standing at the water's edge. The woman got off and spoke to Francisco in an Indian tongue that Montesinos could not understand, although he could perceive that he was being identified in the conversation. She then turned to her male companions to explain the situation. Upon hearing her words, they rose, went over to Montesinos, and to his utter astonishment said, "Shema Yasharala Yahawah Alanawahawa Yahawah Akut. Hear, O Israel, the Most High Yahawah, our power is one." They had recited in Hebrew the fundamental credo of Judaism, but they weren't following Judaism. They were Israelites of antiquity. The brief conversation then ensued in their common ancestral tongue. According to Montesinos, whose fluency in it is almost as perplexing to the reader of his narrative as is that of his 3 mysterious new companions, they told him that they were themselves of the tribe of Reuben, and that the tribe of Joseph lived on an island nearby. So they're telling them that they came from the tribe of Reuben and from the tribe of Joseph, which Joseph is Ephraim and Manasseh. The day when they were at last to issue forth into the world was coming soon, they explained, but in the meantime they could not allow visitors to cross over to them. They were willing to make an exception in the near future, however, on account of their need for education. So they're telling you within this book that the explorers of Europe encountered 3 tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel who were in Hispaniola, in America. This is what they won't tell you on your news or on your TV channels or in your movies. They don't make movies about this stuff. And these were dark Indians. These were indigenous Indians of the Americas. They were of the 10 tribes of Israel, pursuant to 2 Ezra chapter 13 and 40 on down. Now this is a book called Puerto Rico, The Flame of Resistance, written by the People's Press Puerto Rico Project, designed by Jane Norling. This book was copyrighted in 1977. On page 7, I'm going to read this insert that I highlighted. When Ephraim started worshiping idols, this is what happened. It reads, on November 19, 1493, Christopher Columbus and his crew landed in Boricua. That's what the Puerto Ricans call themselves, right? Boricua. They brought the gun and the sword. That's the archers. That's the conquistadors that we read about, Genesis 49:23. The Christian cross and the Bible to the island. You thought these were good Christians? They worship another God, these Christians. These are not the people that we heard about in Acts chapter 11. Columbus claimed the land for Queen Isabella of Spain. Soon, Spanish conquistadors, the archers, landed on Boricuan. They brought with them brutality, avarice, machismo, smallpox, and syphilis. Across the Caribbean, Latin America, and what is now California, Arizona, and New Mexico, Spanish conquistadors burned, tortured, crucified, and destroyed in their search for gold. One Mexican Indian described the Spanish quest as follows. They lifted up the gold as if they were monkeys, with expressions of joy, as if they were something for which they yearned with a great thirst. Their bodies fattened on it, and they hunger violently for it. They killed so many Indians that it made a river of blood, and the day became red because of all the blood. And they want to praise Christopher Columbus? How about that? You know how many Indians were killed in the Americas? Try something like 200 million. 200 million. or more. Look at this. The cross and the Bible notwithstanding, gold alone was sacred to the Spanish conquerors. On the island of Boricua, two cultures. Who were the two cultures? Ephraim and Manasseh. Two civilizations met in bloody conflict. Spain was an empire, an economic and political system based on conquest, exploitation, and theft. Just like John 10:10, the thief cometh to destroy, to kill, and to lie. The Taino were a farming people. They had weapons, and they defended their land, but they did not conquer other nations. The Taino walked, the Spanish rode horseback. The Taino sailed in small canoes. The Spanish sailed in ships of war, so they came to kill. One respected life, the other craved gold. How about that? I'm going to drop down here. This is where Puerto Rico got its name. A year later, in 1511, gold fever ran so high that the Spanish settlement on the island of Boricuan was named Port of Rico. So what does Puerto Rico mean? It means or rich port, rich port. That's where the name came from. Before that, they knew the tribes that they came from, as we have read in Lost Tribes in Promised Land by Ronald Sanders. They called themselves from the tribe of Reuben and from the tribe of Joseph, which is Ephraim and Manasseh, pertaining to the Bible of the 12 tribes of Israel. So they beat our people down to a smithereens because we had stopped following the laws of our power. This is a book called Africa's Gift to America by J.A. Rogers. We're going to go in this book and we're going to go to page 30. We'll show you how the conquistadors were behaving around these holy people. It reads here, they even sent Indians to be sold in Europe. How many of you knew that the Indians were sold into Europe on slave ships, just like the Negroes were sold to the Americas and the South Americas? The Indians were sold to Europe. Columbus himself took 400 for sale there in 1498. The early American whites were almost as cruel. Connecticut whites massacred the Pequot Indians. Pequot, you can find that in the Bible. It was a tribe who had this name. Infants were torn from their mother's breast and hacked to pieces. Like we read in Genesis 49:23, they hated them. They hated the Israelites. The heads of the parents were chopped off and kicked about in the streets. Imagine that. That's real hate. Governor Bradford wrote, it was a fearful sight to see them frying in the fire, and the streams of blood quenching the same, and terrible was the stink and stench thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they, the whites, gave praise thereof to their God. What God were they praying to? They weren't praying to the Most High YAHAWAH. They were praying to Caesar Borgia. They were praying to a false God. So we have to understand that these people don't have our best interests. They didn't have it then, and they don't have it today. Let's go to the book of Psalms, chapter 50, verse 21. Psalms 50 and 21. Notice what it says. This is who they thought they were praying to. They weren't praying to our power. Psalms chapter 50, verse 21. These things hast thou done, and I kept silence. The Most High kept silent while that was going on. Why? Because we broke the first commandment, which was idol worship. These things hast thou done, and I kept silence. Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such a one as thyself. The conquistadors, these nations that came up against us. But I will reprove thee and set them in order before thine eyes. He's going to set us in order before our enemies' eyes. So he's going to correct us, and he's going to set us in order before our enemies' eyes, and we're going to take them down. But we can't do it without Hamashiach Yahawashi. So we can't do nothing. We're waiting patiently for our Messiah to return. When he returns, that's when that's going to happen. He's going to set everything in order, pursuant to the scriptures. Okay, let's read this about the conquistadors in the same book. This is page 33. It says, pilgrims as drunks and sodomites. How about that? So your Christopher Columbus, your Ponce de Leon, they were all drunks and sodomites. It says, even the early pilgrims of New England, though very pious, or were forced to appear so, they were acting like they were very good people, weren't all the hard-working, very desirable characters we've been led to believe. So we thought that they were nice people. We thought they were good, wholesome people, but they were sodomites. They were drunks. Oh, let me correct this. Governor Bradford, writing in 1642 of the severity of punishments in his colony, said, "And yet all this could not suppress the breaking out of sundry notorious sin, especially drunkenness and uncleanness, not only incontinence between persons unmarried, for which many, both men and women, have punished sharply, but some married persons, but that which is even worse, sodomy. Nevertheless, the Mayflower ancestry is still considered the highest in the United States." So on that Mayflower, you had the worst criminals coming over here. And they were conducting themselves as alcoholics and sodomites, whether they were married or not married. They were unfaithful. And they pushed all of this on our people. This is why Gad is still messed up to this day of drinking alcohol. Here's another book. This is called From Columbus to Castro, The History of the Caribbeans, 1492 to 1969 by Eric Williams. This was published in 1970. We're going to go to this chapter, which is called White Capital and Colored Labor, on page 30. We're going to jump over to page 31. I'm going to start at the bottom paragraph. Notice what it reads. As the years went by, Columbus more and more adopted the view that the real riches of the West Indies lay in their Indian population. He saw in the cannibalism of the Caribs a pretext for their enslavement. He described them as they weren't cannibals. He described them as a wild people fit for any work, well proportioned and very intelligent, and who, when they had got rid of their cruel habits to which they have been accustomed, will be better than any other kind of slaves. On his third voyage in 1498, he shipped 600 Indians back to Spain. If they were cannibals, why did they ship 600 Indians back to Spain? Remember, these tribes knew who they were according to the Bible. They quoted Hebrew dialect to the explorers. So this is a bunch of lies. The slave trade in the Caribbean thus began as outward and not inward cargoes, taking the form of Indians transported from the West Indies to Spain, rather than of Negroes transported from West Africa to the Caribbean. So a lot of the Indians were transported where? To Spain on slave ships. So Deuteronomy 28 and 68 also applies to our fellow brethren of the Americas, who were also transported. In the meantime, however, the Pope had enjoined on the Spanish sovereigns the duty of treating the Indians kindly, which is a lie, and converting them to Catholicism. How do you treat someone kindly enough to convert to Catholicism? That makes no sense at all. The sovereigns thereupon issued a royal decree whereby those Indians who accepted Spanish sovereignty and submitted to it without resistance were considered subjects of the crown. They made them slaves. They put them on a ship. They sent them to a new land, and they made them convert to Catholicism. How is that kind? And as such could not be reduced to slavery. I'll read that again. Whereby those Indians who accepted Spanish sovereignty and submitted to it without resistance were considered subjects of the crown. So what happened to their parents? Their parents got killed. And as such could not be reduced to slavery. The decree left the road open to the enslavement of those who resisted. See that? Now they're telling you the truth. So what happened to their parents and their family? Those who resisted, they got slaughtered. The legal basis for slavery became the infamous requisition read out by a notary to natives who did not understand Spanish. So the Puerto Ricans didn't speak Spanish. The Cubans didn't speak Spanish. The Mexicans didn't speak Spanish. So how did they get that language? It was pushed on them. It was forced on them. The others were to be treated as freemen and employed for wages. Then they became slaves. That's Puerto Rico, that's Cuba, that's Santo Domingo. There's all these different little islands. They all were terrorized. Look at this. In 1495, the Spaniards were engaged in open warfare with the Indians. Naked, armed only with bows and arrows, the Indians were no match for the Spanish crossbows, knives, artillery, cavalry, and the dogs trained by the Spaniards to hunt them down. Thoroughly terrorized, the Indians were subjected to the payment of a tribute, which goes into the scriptures, subject to tribute. First Maccabees chapter 8, they did the same thing. The Greeks conquered our people there. It says amounting to from 1/2 of 2/3 of an ounce of gold every 3 months in the case of those who live near the mines, and 25 pounds of cotton for those who did not. The Indians, in despair, fled to the mountains, abandoned all civilization, and preferred to starve to death. See that? So they enforced labor on the natives of Hispaniola, Ephraim and Manasseh, all because, again, we were involved with idol worship. The Most High turned his back on us, and the conquistadors came over and destroyed us. Okay, I'm going to go to the devastation of the Indies, a brief account, translated from the Spanish by Herma Brifat. This book was published or copyrighted in 1965. We're going to go to page 33. And this is some of the atrocities that happened on Hispaniola. Okay? This is what the conquistadors did to the natives. We'll start here where it says, and the Christians, because that's what they called themselves, the conquistadors. And the Christians, with the horses and swords and pikes, began to carry out massacres and strange cruelties against them. They attacked the towns and spared neither the children, nor the aged, nor pregnant women, nor women and childbed, not only stabbing them and dismembering them, but cutting them to pieces as if dealing with sheep in the slaughterhouse. Now that goes into the curses of Deuteronomy 28. Let's go there. Deuteronomy 28 verse 49. Okay, yes, Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 49, it says, the Most High shall bring a nation against thee from far. Where did they come from? Spain. From the end of the earth. Where did they go? Where did they come from the end of the earth? From the eastern hemisphere to the western hemisphere. So all the 12 tribes were scattered mostly to the western hemisphere. As swift as the eagle fleeth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Just like we read from Columbus to Castro, that the natives didn't even understand Spanish. A nation, it says here in verse 50, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle and the fruit of thy land until thou be destroyed. So they destroyed our people. Which also shall not leave thee either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kind, or flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee. And that same thing is going on today in the East. They're doing that in Iran right now, in Palestine. They're destroying everything. So it's the same people with the same mascot. Let's go back to the book on page 33. And it says, they attacked the towns and spared neither the children, nor the aged, nor the pregnant women, nor women in childbed. So these are women who were bearing children. It says, not only stabbing them and dismembering them, but cutting them to pieces as if dealing with sheep in the slaughterhouse. And this is who you people look up to in these countries. You look up to the so-called white man. They're destroying our people. You vote for them. You share things with them. These people hate us. Just like it said in Genesis chapter 49, verse 23, it said that they hated Ephraim. They laid bets as to who, with one stroke of the sword, could split a man in two, or could cut off his head, or spill out his entrails with a single stroke of the pike. So they were placing bets on how quick they could kill somebody. They took infants from their mother's breasts, snatching them by the legs and pitching them head first against the crags, or snatched them by the arms and threw them into the rivers. Roaring with laughter, and saying as the babes fell into the water, "Boil there, you offspring of the devil." Other infants they put to the sword along with their mothers and anyone else who happened to be nearby. They made some low-wide gallows on which the hanged victims' feet almost touched the ground, stringing up their victims in lots of 13, in memory of our Redeemer and his 12 apostles. Judas made the 13th person of the 12 apostles. So they did that in mockery to the 12 tribes of Israel, because they knew who they were. They knew that they were from the tribes of Israel. They knew they came from the tribe of Joseph and of the tribe of Reuben, which is Reuben, Ephraim, and Manasseh. It reads, "In memory of our Redeemer and his 12 apostles, then set burning wood at their feet and thus burned them alive. To others they attached straw or wrapped their whole bodies in straw and set them afire. With still others, all those they wanted to capture alive, they cut off their hands and hung them round the victim's neck, saying, 'Go now, carry the message,' meaning take the news to the Indians who have fled to the mountains." They usually dealt with the chieftains and nobles in the following way. They made a grid of rods, which they placed on forked sticks, then lashed the victims to the grid and lighted a smoldering fire underneath, so that little by little, as those captives screamed in despair and torment, their souls would leave them. So this is some demonic stuff. This is some true hatred, what we're reading about. True hatred. And these people had the nerve to call themselves Christians. These are the people that are ruling over us to this day, until Yahawashi says enough. This is page 35. "And because all the people who could do so fled to the mountains to escape these inhuman, ruthless, and ferocious acts, the Spanish captains, enemies of the human race, pursued them with the fierce dogs. They kept which attacked the Indians, tearing them to pieces and devouring them. And because on few and far between occasions the Indians justifiably killed some Christians, the Spaniards made a rule among themselves that for every Christian slain by the Indians, they would slay 100 Indians." So this goes into the scriptures, what we just read in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 51. It says, "And he shall eat the fruit of thy labor, of thy cattle, and the fruit of thy land until he has destroyed you, which also shall not leave thee either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kind, or flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, until the high and fenced walls come down wherein thou trustest throughout all thy land. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, throughout all the land which the Most High thy power have given thee." And remember, the Most High gave Ephraim and Manasseh those lands in the Western Hemisphere. All right? Okay, so I'm going to take you to Hosea chapter 9. Hosea chapter 9, verse 11. And this is a prophecy of Ephraim. And notice what it says. "As for Ephraim, the glory shall flee away like a bird." And that's what happened to Ephraim's glory. He lost his heritage. He lost his understanding of the Most High. It says, "As for Ephraim, their glory shall flee away like a bird, from the birth and from the womb, and from the conception." Why is that? Because when the conquistadors came over there, the women were having babies from the conquistadors. It says, "Though they bring up their children, yet will I bereave them, that there shall not be a man left." What does that mean? That means every time these women had babies by the conquistadors, they would put these babies to death. There was no men of the conquistadors coming up. They were putting needles in their brains, just like in Haiti, they were doing the same thing. They slip a needle in the baby's brain because it was the enemy's babies they were having. It says, "Yea, woe also to them when I depart from them. Ephraim, as I saw Tyrus, is planted in a pleasant place. But Ephraim shall bring forth his children to the murderer. See that? So that's what happened when we started falling to the enemies, and our people started to climb the wall to mix in with the enemies. And so this is why you see some real dark Ephraimites, some real dark Puerto Ricans, and some real light Puerto Ricans. It says, give them, O power, what wilt thou give? Give them a miscarrying womb and dry breasts, because our women were killing the babies of the enemies. Let's go to Hosea chapter 7. Hosea chapter 7 and verse 8. Hosea chapter 7 verse 8. It reads here, Ephraim, which is the so-called Puerto Ricans, he hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned. If you take a pancake and you cook a pancake, one side is dark, the other side is light. This is what it means by Ephraim is a cake not turned. Okay, look at verse 9. Strangers have devoured his strength. The conquistadors have devoured his strength. They are the archers, and he knoweth it not. Ephraim he doesn't even consider who he is. He's taken the name of Puerto Rican and have run with it. He thinks that he's Latino. He thinks he's Spanish, but that's not what he is. He's from the 12 tribes of Israel. Strangers have devoured his strength, and he knoweth it not. Yea, gray hairs are here and there upon him, yet he knoweth it not. You see a lot of older Puerto Ricans, a lot of older Cubans. They got gray hair all in their head, and they still don't know who they are. And the pride of Yasharallah testifieth to his face, and they do not return to the Most High Yahawah, nor seek him for all this. Ephraim also is like a silly dove, without heart. They call to Egypt, they call to bondage, they go to Assyria. So Ephraim is like a silly dove, the Most High is calling him, because he doesn't consider who he is or where he comes from. He doesn't challenge the powers that be. So this is where you get that. I want to take you to Hosea chapter 13 and verse 15. Hosea 13 and 15. It reads, though he be fruitful among his brethren, because Ephraim was the biggest tribe amongst the 12 tribes of Israel, he will be fruitful amongst his brethren. And east wind shall come, the wind of the Most High shall come up from the wilderness, and his springs shall become dry. This is the conquistadors coming from the east. And his fountains shall be dried up, and he shall spoil the treasures of all pleasant vessels. So Ephraim's land became dried up. You can't find gold and all these precious rubies in Puerto Rico anymore, because from the east came the Spaniards, the conquistadors, and they took all those jewels and all that precious metals out of Ephraim's land and Cuba's land. Let's go into this book. This is the Taínos and the Caribs, the history of the indigenous natives who encountered Christopher Columbus in 1492 by Charles Rivers, editors. I'm going to go to the first page. This is the introduction page. These are the huts and the tents, the houses that Ephraim and Manasseh dwelt in. I'm going to read here. It reads, as soon as I arrived in the Indies, on the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force. He took some of the natives by force. He's telling you how he encountered the natives. He took them by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts. Christopher Columbus. On October 12, 1492, one of the most important first contacts of the modern era was made when 3 ships of Spanish origin approached the island archipelago, now known as the Bahamas, cautiously dropping anchor as the captain of the fleet gazed across to what he assumed was the coast of India. According to the popular version of the story, amazed at the sight of the ships and men of such unfamiliar appearance, the native people of the island plunged into the clear waters of the western Atlantic, expertly swimming or aboard dugout canoes, and came out to greet the strangers. So this is the first phase in October. Then they went in August, then they went in September. Let's drop down third paragraph where it says by whatever means one might choose to view it, this meeting of cultures certainly did mark the beginning of a bold new chapter in the history of Europe and the beginning of the end of an ancient race of native people occupying a vast new continent. What's that vast new continent? America. South, Central, and North America, where the 10 tribes dwell. Going to the next page, it reads, the entries into Christopher Columbus log as he recorded his first encounters with the indigenous people of the Indies are very telling. The island people arrived alongside the ships offering humble gifts that Columbus described as parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk bells. These were the Taino peoples, or the Arawaks, as they would come to be known, and Columbus described them as well-built, with good bodies and handsome features. Let's drop down. So they came bearing gifts. When we read 2 Ezra chapter 12, and we go to verse 39, it says, art not thou it that remaineth of the four beasts whom I made to reign in my world, that the end of their times might come through them? Who is that? The conquistadors, the Europeans, the Americans. And the fourth came and overcame all the beasts that were past. This is the fourth beast, starting with the Roman Greco Empire to now, all the way to these days. And the fourth came and overcame all the beasts that were past. Who are the beasts? You had the Babylonian Empire, you had the Persians and the Medes, and the Greeks. And it says here, and had power over the world with great fearfulness, and over the whole compass of the earth with much wicked oppression. And so long time dwelt he upon the earth with deceit. For the earth hast thou not judged with truth. For thou hast afflicted the meek. Who's the meek? The 12 tribes of Israel, Ephraim and Manasseh. Thou hast hurt the peaceable. Thou hast loved liars, and destroyed the dwellings of them that, who are the liars? The Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, the British, the Spaniards, the Italians, the Polish, the Ukrainians. It says, and destroyed the dwellings of them that brought forth fruit, and has cast down the walls of such as did thee no harm. They cast down the walls of Ephraim and Manasseh, and of Judah. Therefore is thy wrongful dealings come up unto the highest, and thy pride unto the mighty. The highest also have looked upon the proud times, because the people of Esau, the people of Europe, America, were prideful. And behold, they are ended, and his abominations are fulfilled. And therefore appear no more, thou eagle, which is a mascot, that the Most High prophesied in the book of Deuteronomy 28, in the book of Obadiah, in Daniel, and in Revelation. This is the eagle. Nor thy horrible wings, nor thy wicked feathers, nor thy malicious heads, nor thy hurtful claws, nor all thy vain body, that all the earth may be refreshed. So how's the earth going to get refreshed? When the Most High removes the wicked who came and slaughtered and raped and pillaged all the tribes. Let's jump back to page 2. Let's start it thus. Thus, a chain of events was set in motion that would permanently affect Western civilization and the Taino and the Caribs as the first two groups of indigenous people to encounter the Spanish were driven to extinction within a century of Columbus' arrival. In a sense, that would make them the first casualties of European, the fourth beast, imperialism in the New World. This is page 4. Now this is when the Europeans brought forth the papal bull. It reads, furthermore, the Portuguese were being strongly encouraged by the Catholic Church in the 1450s The Pope issued papal bulls promising Portugal that at least among Catholic nations, this is when Africa got overcame in 1455. Portugal would be given a trade monopoly in the lands they discovered in Africa, south of the Sahara. That was all the motivation the Portuguese needed. By then, the Portuguese had already sailed to Sierra Leone on the western coast of Africa, about half of the way down to the continent. This is page 12. Look at this. The African theory, on the other hand, has been more forcefully and more widely championed. The theory is based primarily on the arguments of one respected scholar, a Guyanese-born professor of African studies at Rutgers University named Ivan van Sertima. I got that book. Who holds the opinion that two migrations from Africa to the Caribbean took place. The first of either Egyptian, Nubian, or Ethiopian origin. Remember, Africa was named, the whole continent was called Ethiopia. So this is talking about the 10 tribes. Arrived on a fleet of ocean-going dhows sometime between 800 BCE and 600 BCE. So think about that. The Assyrian captivity took place in Israel around 722 BC. It was only for a few years, that captivity, before the Babylonian captivity took place. So when you read 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter, that's what it's talking about right here. It says, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea the king, whom Salmanassar, the king of Assyria, led away captive. And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. This is when they went through the Euphrates. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, Ephraim and Manasseh, that they might there keep their statutes, the Most High's laws, statutes, and commandments, which they never kept in their own land. The 10 tribes never kept the laws, statutes, and commandments after they broke away from the kingdom of Judah. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. And that is the Strait of Hormuz that they went through. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. It took a year and a half to go around southern Africa to get to the drifts of the Atlantic Ocean into the Americas. And the same region is called Arsareth. That was America's name, Arsareth. Then dwelt they there until the latter time. And now when they shall begin to come, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through. Therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. But those that he left behind of thy people are they that are found within my borders. So this happened right after 722 BC, 724 BC. So his guesstimation is approximately right, between 600 BCE and 800 BC. It says, therefore a second migration followed, originating from Mali on the coast of West Africa and occurring in the late 13th century or early 14th century, a century or so before Columbus. So all this happened before the Europeans, the Spaniards, the Portuguese went into West Africa and conquered a lot of the Jews who were there and brought forth Jews from Spain and Portugal to Africa, to the island of St. Thomas. The basis of the argument is perhaps a little ephemeral, but it is nonetheless compelling. Certain cultural retentions among Central American groups and African features in the monumental statuary of the Olmecs, you know, those big statues down in Central America, and various rituals and ceremonies have, according to Professor Van Sertima, an identifiable African origin. It might perhaps be worth adding that Van Sertima's opinion is a rather lonely one in an academic field that tends, on the whole, to reject this theory as fanciful, arguing that such developments as ritual and monumental statuary were independent and internal. So all of this happened because the Most High was moving us because we broke his law, statutes, commandments. So these are all Israelites who were dwelling in these countries. You see? This is Ezekiel 11 and 17. Therefore say, thus saith the Most High, I will even gather you from the people and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Yasharallah. And they shall come thither, and they shall take away all the detestable things thereof, and all the abominations thereof from thence. This is why the 10 tribes left. They wanted to get away from the heathen. But Judah stayed. And I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within you. And I will make the stony heart out of their flesh, and will give them an heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them. And they shall be my people, and I will be their power. So the Most High is going to remove this stony flesh, which is sin, and give us a spiritual flesh, a spiritual heart, to follow after his ways, dwelling in these countries pursuant to Deuteronomy 33 and Ezekiel chapter 11 and verse 17 will be a small sanctuary among the nations. All right, this is page 15. Notice what it says. By the time of contact with the Spanish, both the Tainos and the Caribs spoke a different language and were culturally distinct from the mainland Arawaks, although with enough similarities to reasonably conclude that all three were related. These were of the 10 tribes. Again, in the words of Basil Reed, the differences between these languages were substantial, and whatever similarities that existed could be compared to those between English and Dutch within the Indo-European family of languages. So how did Christopher Columbus communicate with them? You got to ask yourself. We go back to the Negroes who were being excavated from Portugal and Spain and sent into Africa. These people were Jews. They either had to flee into Africa or be taken into captivity, unless they became baptized in the Catholic faith. That was the only way they could stay in Spain and Portugal. Then you have people later converting to being Jewish, who were not us. They were converts. But the original people were actual Jews. Okay, let's go back. So this is Fernando and Queen Isabella. In the midst, you had Caesar Borgia posing as Jesus, right? Not Yahawashi, but as the false Messiah, the Antichrist. So it says here, historians have long wondered why Columbus chose this small port. What port? This port right here, Palos de la Frontera. This was a small port, a land of the Jews in Spain, with limited resources rather than the larger ports of Seville or Cadiz. One theory is that the resources in those two places were occupied with the thousands of Jewish refugees leaving Spain in the wake of the monarch's edict of expulsion. In any case, Columbus hired the best ships he could find in Palos, contracting 2 caravels called the Nina and the Pinta from the Pinzon family, and the third, which he called Santa Maria. The 3 ships set out on August 3rd, 1492. So we got October. We're going to go into this book. It's called Rivers of Gold, The Rise of Spanish Empire from Columbus to Magellan by Hugh Thomas. So Christopher Columbus, the first time he went, didn't have anyone to interpret what the indigenous Indians were saying, but the second and third time he did. This is page 86. Look what it says. The majority of the crews came from other ports of the Rio Tinto, Mogor, and Hueva, as well as Palos. That's the city we had just read. But there were also a few from Seville. Mogor had a Jewish district until 1486. Palos had some difficulties on the score with the recent commander of its fort. In consequence, some of the crews with Columbus may have been what? Jews. And these were black Jews. There were two Portuguese, a small number considering the constant interchange of Castilian and Portuguese sailors in Atlantic ports in those days. 4 or 5 men were criminals allowed to escape justice by their enlistment, right? They had to baptize themselves to becoming what? Roman Catholic. Among these were Bartholomew de Torre, who had killed a rival in a brawl. Another, Torre Luis, a converso from what? From being a Jew to becoming Christian, a Roman Catholic Christian, who knew both Arabic and Hebrew. He was a black man that lived amongst the Moors as well as Jews that were black. But of course, not the indigenous languages served as an interpreter. So this particular Jew was able to interpret what the Caribs were speaking. So what were the Caribs speaking? As we read in Lost Tribes and Promised Lands, they were speaking Hebrew. So these were the Jews' brothers. Look at this. There are throughout Africa several nations, unquestionably Negro originally, who have acquired handsome forms and faces, as well as a lighter tint, in consequence of the living in mountainous regions approaching to the temperate climate. You see that? I want y'all to see that. Let's drop down. It reads, a remarkable fact in the history of Luango in the Empire of Congo is that the country, according to the statement which was fully credited by Odenthorpe, himself a writer of most correct judgment and of unimpeachable veracity, contains many Jews settled in it. Who retain their religious rites and distinct habits which keep them isolated from other nations, though thus separate from the African population. So the Jews separated from the Hamite tribes. They are black and resemble the other Negroes in every respect as to physical character. So the Jews are black. See that? It reads here, it is probably in allusion to this case that Pennington in his textbook says the descendants of a colony of Jews originally from Judea settled on the coast of Africa are black. Mr. Rosette, or M. Rosette, declares that there are many Negresses in the Algerine country, whether they have doubtless been brought from the interior of Sudan, and very probably from Hassa, who are of a jet black complexion or color, but with truly Roman countenances. So you got to think about the Jews. They dwelt around the Romans, and they took on the Roman ways and brought them Roman customs and ways into Africa, along with their Hebrew ways. All right, I'm not done with Ephraim and Manasseh. Going back to the book of the Taínos and the Arawaks. It reads here, on the heels of his apparent success and the approval of the Spanish crown, Columbus managed to assemble a much larger fleet for his second trip across the Atlantic. So he had a first trip in August, and then here he comes in September with his warships, which began on September 14th, 1992. His expeditionary force now consisted of 17 ships, including the Nina, but neither of the other two vessels from the previous voyages. It is clear from the number of men and quantity of supplies carried over that Columbus now intended to establish more permanent settlements and pave the way for the establishment of full-scale colonies. They came prepared to take over the Americas, Hispaniola. He also brought with him a contingent of friars. These are Jesuit priests, right? And you know they come to destroy, who would be entrusted with the evangelization of the natives. All right, this is how the smallpox, all these different things, this is how they got there. When they returned to Hispaniola on November 28, 1493, Columbus discovered that the natives of the islands were not quite as passive and accommodating as he first imagined, because when they came in September, there was a great war. The 30 men who had left behind to garrison La Navidad, the first European settlement in the Americas since Leif Erikson Norse colony in Newfoundland, had been wiped out. See that? Those friars, those Jesuit priests, they came and destroyed the indigenous Indians, who were from Ephraim and Manasseh and Reuben. The men, presumably as a result of their rapacious desire for gold and probable abuse of local women, so they were raping the men and the women, eventually became unwelcome among the nearby tribes, who likely exterminated them. The consensual and peaceful colonization that Columbus had promised to undertake had been little more than a brief illusion. So they were destroying our people because we were worshiping idols, because we began to turn our faces away from the Most High and started becoming idol worshipers. And the Most High sent Satan on us. We have not found the Most High until this day. Not in these Christian churches, not in Islam, not in any of that. Speaking of Islam, this happened all around the same time as the Ottoman Empire fighting against the Mongols. Let me show you something. On this page here, this is where Columbus, he's talking to Marco Polo. You all heard of Marco Polo. Marco Polo was telling him how Asia wasn't far from Spain and Portugal. And so his first journey, Christopher Columbus thought he was headed towards Asia. He ended up in the Americas, right? So it says here, first of all, he attempted to map the territories he found in the Caribbean. However, improbably onto Asian geography as he understood it, the northern islands of the Bahamas he imagines may be part of the island empire of Sapongo, Japan. So they had heard stories from Marco Polo and the Portuguese about Japan, because the Portuguese were the first ones to go into Japan. So this is where Christopher Columbus thought he was going. The long coast of Cuba, where he arrived next by heading to the southwest, must be a part of China. Second, in his repeated emphasis on the gentleness and peacefulness of the natives, he also insisting on their status as natural slaves, as an intellectual category used in the ancient world to justify slavery. So he's making them slaves. More specifically, he concluded, they must be among the peoples from whom the great Khan, Ottoman Empire, drew as many slaves. At the same time, he set the stage for the slavery-based colonization that would soon overtake the Caribbean islands and within a few decades wipe out their entire indigenous population. In fact, Columbus began this trend by essentially kidnapping 6 Ghanaian natives, in his words, so that they will learn to speak, example, become interpreters for the expedition. So he was using these tribes to get other tribes and make them slaves. All right? They were humiliating our people. They were putting them in the mines. They were killing them by slavery, putting them in the mines. And a lot of our people don't know it to this day. Page 20. Father Bartholomew recorded a litany of such crimes and abuses, from the simple humiliation of riding on the backs of Indians as beasts of burden to colonists, being carried on litters and fanned by palm leaves or goose wings, because they were strong people. So he took advantage of them. He wrote of knifing Indians by 10s and 20s and of cutting slices off them to test the sharpness of their blades. These are devils. He also told the story of an incident that he personally witnessed of 2 native boys representing trespassing on Spanish-owned land, each with a pet parrot. For no reason other than amusement, the parrot were taken and the boys beheaded. To this, Father Bartholomew added, they suffered and died in the mines and other labors in desperate silence, knowing not a soul in the world to whom they could turn for help. All they had was their God, their power. Here were 60,000 people living on this island, including the Indians, so that from 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and the mines. Who in future generations will believe this? Our own people don't believe it, because they don't know that they're the 12 tribes of Israel. Our people need to wake up. He says, I myself, writing it as a knowledgeable eyewitness, can hardly believe it. So these were our people, scattered to the Western Hemisphere, pursuant to Deuteronomy 33, pursuant to Genesis 49. This is what will befall us in the last days, which was the prophecy of Jacob to his 12 sons. So this is page 103. It reads here, where I have it highlighted. During all these months, the monarchs had remained apparently as uninterested in the possible achievements of Columbus as they were impervious to such news as was brought to them of the tragedies suffered by their late subjects. Who were the late subjects? The victims, the unbending Jews. These are black Jews. the real Jews. Many of these were seized by corsairs and sold as slaves in the very port whence they had set out, while others found themselves in the slave markets of Fez and Tangier. A few returned and then willingly converted on their arrival to what? Roman Catholicism. They became Christians. They became slaves anyway. So this is talking about the black Jews, the Jews of antiquity, not the converts, not those who converted to being Jews, which happened like 100 years later within these large cities. This is also during the time of Caesar Borgia. Everyone knew that Borgia was not going to be the angel pope, whom a few dreamers had optimistically predicted would appear in 1493. So in 1493, this is when the image of the one you call Jesus Christ went all over the world, with the papal bull being signed. When that papal bull got signed, Caesar Borgia also was the image of who we call Jesus Christ, went all over the world. And behind that image, our brothers was massacred. This is page 401 to show you that these Indians, these indigenous Indians, were black and didn't start to lighten until the conquistadors came. Right here, it reads at the bottom, Las Casas said that every year 7,000 or 8,000 Indians were kidnapped on the mainland or in the Bahamas and carried off to La Española. He was never accurate with figures, as we know, so it could have been way more, and I'm sure it was. But he did add, Their Highness ought to give generous license to settlers to carry there as many black slaves as each settler wants. This is talking about the Indians, thousands of Indians. They were black slaves. This is why you can't tell the difference between a Negro and an indigenous Indian. Here's a book called A Tribute for the Negro. This was written in 1848 by Wilson Amistad. Page 64, let's read this. It reads, The Jews, however slightly, their features may have simulated to those of other nations amongst whom they are scattered, from the causes already stated, certainly form a very striking example as regards the uncertainty of perpetuity in color, descended from one stock and prohibited by the most sacred institutions from intermarrying with the people of other nations, and yet dispersed, talking about the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, which are the 12 tribes of Israel, according to the divine prediction, into every country on the globe. This one people is marked with the colors of all: fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France and Turkey, swarthy in, which is black, swarthy in Portugal and Spain, olive, which is also black, olive in Syria and in Chaldees, tawny, which is light skin black, tawny or copper color in Arabia and in Egypt, whilst they are black at Congo in Africa. So it's telling you that the Israelites are black people, people of various shades of brown. You see that? So they put us in captivity based on that law of the papal bull. All people of color had to go into slavery. Going back to the book, Lost Tribes in Promised Land, this is what they said, the explorers said when they had ran up on the 12 tribes of Israel in the Americas before we got overran by the conquistadors. It reads here on page 365, His ancestors, to their eternal shame, had indeed made war on them and persecuted them. Only the sorcerers of his tribe had perceived that they were a special people. The sorcerers are the priests, and had given warning that they should be left alone. Pursuant to the scriptures, it says, leave Ephraim alone because of the idols. The power of these children of Israel is the true power. They had said, and everything inscribed on their tablets is true. What tablets? The tablets that Moses received on the mountain of Sinai. At the end of days, they will be powers of all the nations of the earth. One nation will come bringing many things to this land. And after we have all been provided for, the children of Israel will go forth from where they now are and reign over the whole earth as they once did. So these are the explorers that know that this is going to happen. And this was written in this particular historical book in the 16th century. So people know who we are, like the elite and the historians, but they're not telling us who we are. Who's telling us who we are? The 12 tribes of Israel. We're telling each other who we are in order to quicken us to the Holy Spirit of HAMASHAYACH Yahawashi to reach the Father. We are just restoring you back to your heritage by quickening you to the information that you need to be a great people once again. We are of the 12 tribes of Israel: Judah, Benjamin, Levi, Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher. All these tribes, we are of the greatest people on the planet. And the Most High is going to bring us back to restoration once again. So I hope this was beneficial to you and that you can have some vision on quickening your spirit on what these people have done to us. Because if you're watching TV, they ain't going to never tell you about this. The movies today are garbage. They never give you they never give the tribes information to make them feel good. This is the understanding of what we've lost. We've lost everything due to the fact that we turn our back on our power. Okay? The Most High said in Hosea 4:6, he said, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject you, that thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy power. I will also forget your children." And that's what he did. It says, "As they were increased, so they sinned against me. Therefore will I change their glory into shame." So everything that the Israelites believed in, trusted in, the riches, just like Ephraim said in Hosea, "I am rich." He lost everything because he lost the knowledge and the understanding of his power. And Yahawashi is here to substantiate that there is a way to the Father by repentance and keeping of his laws, statutes, and commandments. Repent! Repent, family, repent.
This is the word of the Lord of hosts. I took you from the pastures and from following the sheep to be prince over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone and have destroyed all the enemies in your path. I will make you a great name among the great ones of the earth. I will assign a place for my people in Israel. There I will plant them, and they shall dwell in their own land.